Welcome to Chapter 6, um, where we'll be looking at ethics and politics in social research. So, ethics, especially in social research, are essential for establishing a foundation of trust between researchers and participants, and this trust ensures the integrity of the research process, leading to credible and reliable outcomes. So, ethical principles guide researchers in how they interact with participants, collect data, and analyze results. So, one of the primary concerns in social research is the protection of participants' rights, dignity, and privacy. And researchers must ensure that their studies do not harm participants and that all interactions are conducted with respect. So, researchers have a duty to uphold ethical standards, not just to protect participants, but to maintain the integrity of the research field as a whole. And this includes being transparent about their methods, ensuring voluntary participation, and handling data responsibly. And we will talk more about this when we talk about the IRB process. Um, so, a couple of key points here would be informed consent. So that means that participants must be fully informed about the nature of the research before they agree to take part. And this includes understanding the purpose, risks, benefits, and procedures of the study. So, informed consent is a critical step in ensuring that the participation is voluntary and based on a full understanding of what's involved. Um, Confidentiality means that we need to protect the confidentiality of the information provided by the participants. So this means securely storing data, using it only for the purposes stated, and ensuring that participants cannot be identified from the published results. Avoiding harm refers to the principle of do no harm, and it's central to ethical research. So researchers have to design their studies to minimize any potential harm or discomfort to participants, and this includes considering both physical and psychological risks, as well as the potential impact on participants' privacy and personal lives. Clarity and transparency. So, for informed consent to be truly informed, the information provided to participants must be clear, concise, and comprehensive. And so, researchers should avoid jargon and ensure that participants fully understand the study's purpose, risks, and benefits before agreeing to participate. So, think about this in regards to any letters that you might be curating to get permission. Let's say if you're working with the school, or just make sure that it's written in language that anyone can understand. Know your audience. So voluntary participation, research participation needs to be voluntary with participants free to decide whether or not to take part without any form of coercion or undue pressure. And researchers need to be mindful of power dynamics, especially when working with vulnerable populations. So, ongoing consent, that means that participants should be reminded of their rights throughout the study, including the right to withdraw at any point without penalty. And this ongoing consent process is crucial for maintaining ethical standards throughout research. So when we think about qualitative research and its focus on that in-depth understanding of social phenomenon, that's going to present some unique ethical challenges. So, for example, informed consent is often complex in things like ethnography, where researchers might spend extended periods within a community. And confidentiality also becomes more difficult to maintain, especially in small or tight knit groups where participants might be easily identifiable. So the relationship that develops between the researchers and participants can blur boundaries and create power imbalances. And these issues require careful consideration and ethical reflection throughout the research process. These are a few examples that you probably heard of that were some ethical dilemmas that came up specifically, let's say, under the heading of social research. So Milgram's obedience experiment, and this is a pretty famous study which sought to understand obedience to authority, and it raised significant ethical concerns due to its deception and psychological distress caused to participants. So, the study involved participants believing they were administering painful electric shocks to another person, leading to significant emotional and psychological harm. And this case highlights the dangers of using deceptive methods in research, particularly when they can cause lasting harm to participants. You may have heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And so that's another well known study which explored the psychological effects of perceived power by simulating a prison environment. However, the study quickly spiraled out of control with participants really suffering extreme psychological harm. And the experiment raised questions about the adequacy of informed consent and whether participants were truly aware of the potential risks. And this case emphasizes the importance of rigorous ethical review processes, including, particularly in studies involving high risk scenarios. So, the Tuskegee syphilis studies. So, one of the most notorious examples of unethical research, the Tuskegee syphilis study, involved researchers deliberately misleading African American men into believing they were receiving treatment for syphilis when they were not. And the study continued for decades, resulting in significant harm and the deaths of many participants. And this case is a powerful reminder of the catastrophic consequences of ethical violations in research and the importance of protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. So, some key points: physical harm refers to things like injury, illness, or other direct physical consequences. Harm to development that may affect cognitive, emotional, or social growth, leading to long term developmental delays or issues. Loss of self esteem can result in diminished self worth, confidence, and personal identity. Stress, so prolonged or intense stress, can impact mental health and overall well being, potentially leading to anxiety, depression, or other disorders. And encouragement of reprehensible acts is referring to exposure to negative influences, which may lead individuals to engage in unethical or harmful behaviors. So, it's essential to provide all participants with sufficient information to decide whether they want to participate in the research. There can be some challenges associated with achieving complete informed consent because despite our best efforts, it might be even impossible to obtain fully informed consent, and that's due to the challenge of providing prospective participants with every piece of information they may need to make an entirely informed decision. So privacy and informed consent. So privacy, it's closely linked to the concept of informed consent. Participants should understand that consenting to participate does not mean they relinquish all rights to privacy. So providing informed consent does not mean participants fully retract their right to privacy. Covert research methods are generally viewed as violations of the privacy principle as they may involve observing or recording participants without their explicit awareness or consent. The issues of privacy are inherently connected to issues of anonymity and confidentiality, which are critical in maintaining trust in the research process. So here's the scenario. In this scenario, a researcher is studying the effects of therapeutic alliance on treatment outcomes in counseling, and to test a hypothesis, the researcher tells participants that the study is about communication styles in therapy rather than the true focus on therapeutic alliance. So the reason for the deception, the researcher fears that if participants know the real purpose, they may alter the behavior, consciously trying to improve their relationship with the therapist, which could skew the results. Ethical concern here: this deception could be seen as misleading participants about the true nature of the study, raising questions about the integrity of the research process and whether participants' rights are being fully respected. So, some impacts on the participants here relating to trust issues. Participants might feel betrayed if they discover the true purpose after the study, potentially damaging their trust in the counseling profession. The ethical dilemma here: the researcher needs to balance the need to obtain accurate, unbiased data with the ethical obligation to fully. Okay, so here's another scenario with an unanticipated ethical issue. So, in this case, a counseling researcher conducts a study on the impact of trauma informed care on clients with PTSD. And during the study, a participant discloses a previously unreported case of abuse. So the ethical challenge here is that the researcher needs to quickly address this disclosure, and they're going to have to balance the ethical duty to protect the participant with the research protocol. And This type of unanticipated issue requires immediate adaptation of the research approach. We're going to unpack this flow charty type of slide on the next slide, but it's just covering all of the different politics in research that's involved. And um, I mean, I think the takeaway is that research is not conducted in a moral vacuum, and it's impossible basically for all of us to really do objective value for research. It's something that we're striving towards, and that we're connected sometimes with institutions that are going to be putting pressures on us that may also influence us. So we have to just be cognizant that values are going to affect us at every stage of the research process. And there's going to be a number of inherent ethical challenges that we're going to confront. So we have to do our best to sort of mitigate and act in a way that's responsible and ethical, which is why we're talking about this topic so much. So unpacking that previous slide a little bit further, let's look at some of the things that could impact ethical decision making. So funding and agenda setting. So this is referring to the sources of funding for research and how that can significantly influence the research agenda. So think about it. When funding comes from politically motivated sources, there's a risk that the research outcomes may be biased or skewed to favor certain political or commercial interests. And researchers must be aware of these influences and strive to maintain the integrity and objectivity of their work. There could be institutional pressures. So researchers often face pressures from their institutions to produce results that align with the institution's goals or values. And this can lead to ethical challenges, particularly when the pressure is to produce favorable or expected results rather than allowing the research to be guided by the evidence. So, upholding ethical standards requires resisting these pressures and prioritizing the pursuit of truth over institutional expectations. Power imbalances refers to the power dynamics between researchers and participants, which can introduce some ethical complexities. So, in some cases, participants may feel coerced to take part in research, and that's due to the perceived authority or power of the researcher. So, ensuring that participation is genuinely voluntary requires addressing these power imbalances, which might involve creating a more participatory research design or offering assurances of non coercion.